It's time for the Holei Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the Holei Fantasy Football Podcast. Today is Monday, October 20th. Not the end, still a Monday Night Football game left, but crazy week 8 of the NFL in the book. If you're hearing this, that means we got to episode 2, which is hopefully good news for you, but it's definitely good news for me that I was able to put at least 2 of these out. The thing is, as time goes on and as much fantasy football as I've played, started at 11, now 23, I feel like I honestly might get dumber as the years go on. What a crazy week for fantasy football. So many things that don't make sense. And that's the beauty of fantasy football, is no expert or even person who keeps up with it a lot will ever be able to predict how fantasy football will shake out on any given week. This episode will try to be a bit more concise and consolidated than episode 1. We're going to go over the fantasy relevant players in every single game, or fantasy irrelevant players in every single game of Sunday's slate. We will then also preview Monday Night Football, and then we will review and check on the scores for the matchups in the Holei League this week to end the episode. And look, fantasy football affects a lot of your mood and how you feel on a Sunday any given week. And for me, yesterday was not a good feeling, as I had to watch Chase, who sits at 1-6 on the season, have a legacy game projected at 165 current points when he is facing me. And I'm not even having a bad week, which is why that fantasy football head-to-head matchups are always so fun. I am projected currently with Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt left to play tonight at 140 points, which in a 14-man PPR league will usually win you a week. So, unfortunate for me, happy for Chase, glad he got the big week, not happy it happened against me. But yeah, so I had a solid week, as I'll show later in the podcast. I had the quarterback 1 and running back 1 on the week in my fantasy lineup, and I'm still going to lose by a considerable margin. Fantasy football for you. No more bitterness out of me, though. We will move right along, and we will get into the week in review.
Fantasy Week in Review.
Week 8, interesting week. The New York Jets get their first win of the season. The Miami Dolphins blow out the Falcons. The Ravens, without Lamar Jackson, take down the Bears. The Bills blow out the Panthers. So many interesting things to see and to watch. A few injury things that we didn't think that were going to happen off the back of Friday's episode. Lamar Jackson, who, according to reports, had 2 limited practices as well as a full practice on Friday, ruled out for the game on Saturday. Then the full practice participant that was reported was then reverted to a limited practice participant. The NFL apparently is looking into the Ravens' practice protocols for that reason, because it's very odd to see a player log a alleged full practice on Friday and then get ruled out the next day. So that was interesting, and that changed a lot, at least in terms of who you thought were going to have good games and how dominant the Ravens were going to be. The Ravens still ended up winning the game, but that definitely changed a lot for fantasy. And the first game we're going to get into with this is another one that shocked me. Michael Penix Jr. pulled out with injury pretty early Sunday morning. Kirk Cousins gets the start. Has a very fantasy irrelevant game, but also played a huge reason as to why the Falcons lost this game. The Dolphins had a very good offensive day. But Tagovailoa, 20 for 26, 205 yards, 4 touchdowns, 24 fantasy points. But probably sitting in waivers in most fantasy leagues, so nobody probably benefited off of that stat line. The most disappointing player in this game, by far, Bijan Robinson, 4.8 fantasy points. The game script just went out the door. Dolphins went up big early, and Bijan just never found relevance in this game. Really shocking to see, because usually Bijan, regardless of the win or loss, is a pretty dominant player for the Falcons fantasy-wise. Another big part of this game that I failed to mention at the beginning, Drake London also being ruled out with injury. So on top of losing your QB1, you lose your wide receiver 1. Again, that recipe makes you think that the running back 1 would have a very good game. Unfortunately, that did not happen. No fantasy relevant wide receiver for the Falcons in this game. You thought the bump would have went to Darnell Mooney. He had 1 catch on 4 targets, 11 yards, completely irrelevant. Kyle Pitts had a solid day, 9 catches on all 9 targets, 59 yards. Dolphins, though, 34 points of offense. Tua with the great game. Achane with 20 points. He got back into the end zone. Ollie Gordon, even with a 20-yard receiving touchdown, he finished with 13.6 points. Jalen Waddle, Again, a player that I think is going to have a very big rest of 2025. I think he could be creeping into that top 12 wide receiver 1 territory. 5 catches, 99 yards. Malik Washington even got into the end zone on 4 catches for 36 yards, and no tight end relevance there. Moving right along, we got the Ravens taking down the Bears 30-16. Caleb Williams, tough outing. No touchdowns, 1 interception. Tyler Huntley played fine, 16 points. Nothing that, again, nobody in our league, or I'm assuming in most leagues, probably played him. Big bounce back for Derrick Henry, though. 21 for 71, not super efficient. Got into the end zone twice, though. He finishes with 19 fantasy points. In terms of the Bears, DeAndre Swift got into the end zone. Not a super efficient game for him either, but finishes with 15 points. In terms of receiving, Rome Odunze. He is the wide receiver 1 in this offense, and that needs to be understood and known. 7 for 10, 114 yards, 18 fantasy points. DJ Moore had a decent game as well. 4 catches on 7 targets, 73 yards. Lamine Zaccheaus, oddly enough, 7 targets, all 7 of them catches, 10 fantasy points for him. Luther Burden, the rookie for the Bears, he had the big boom game earlier in the season. You just got to stay away from him. He is just not in this offense. He's going to catch a 75-yard touchdown, or he's going to have what he had today, 1 catch for -1 yards. You cannot count on him. If you have the bench slot and you want to stash him, by all means do it, but I just don't think he really has much value going forward. In terms of Ravens wide receivers, Zay Flowers, Mr. Dependable, 7 catches, 63 yards, 14 fantasy points. Not a game that's going to wow you, but he is going to consistently get you points week in and week out. In terms of tight ends, Colson Loveland, 3 for 38. Okay day. You're not thrilled with that if you started him. Mark Andrews does not get the touchdown in this game. Neither does Isaiah Likely. It is Charlie Kohler, 1 catch, 10 yards, and a touchdown. Andrews with a fumble, 3 catches, 34 yards. Isaiah Likely, 2 for 8. I'm not trusting any of these Ravens tight ends until I see Lamar Jackson on the field, which should be next week. And next, the Buffalo Bills dominating the Carolina Panthers in Carolina, 40-9. A really solid Josh Allen day. He didn't have to do much. He got the 2 rushing touchdowns. He only had 163 yards in the air. He had 150-yard passing touchdown, but only the one on the day. And so still turned in 24 fantasy points, with which, if you started him, you're content with. James Cook, what a game for James Cook. 19 carries, 216 yards, 2 touchdowns, one of those going for 50+. In our league, we have an additional point for 50+ yard touchdowns. In terms of Panthers, Andy Dalton looked horrible out there. And Andy Dalton is not in that tier of veteran QB like Joe Flacco. Andy Dalton borderline shouldn't have a job. This was a tough outing. 175 yards passing, interception, 2 fumbles, which he lost both of them. 0.1 fantasy points for Andy Dalton. It is bad. It is really bad. I would look elsewhere if this Bryce Young injury is going to last more than just this week. For the Panthers, Andy Dalton is not the solution there. Nothing really else. Obviously, when you have 9 fantasy points, it's hard for players to do well. Running game, pretty much you have the Chuba Hubbard touchdown, but so little yards. He still finishes under 10 points. Rico Dowdle efficient on his 8 carries for 54 yards, but that's all. No targets, anything like that. In terms of receiving work, Khalil Shakir, 7 targets, 6 catches, 88 yards, and a touchdown. One being that deep touchdown that I mentioned with Josh Allen earlier, 21.8 fantasy points. It is hard to trust receivers in the Bills offense because Josh Allen loves to spread the ball around. If there is one player you're willing to do it for, it is Khalil Shakir. For receiving on the Panthers, Tedoroa McMillan, 7 catches on 10 targets for 99 yards, 16.9 fantasy points a day you're happy with. Xavier Legette did not follow up his 9 for 92 and a touchdown last week with anything special. 2 catches, 17 yards. The game script played out where the Panthers offense didn't look like doing anything, so that I don't really put on him. None of the tight ends in this game were relevant. One that you might want to keep an eye on is Dalton Kincaid, 1 catch on 3 targets for 23 yards. Kincaid has been a good play this season, but a lot of his play relies on touchdowns. So if the touchdowns aren't coming, he's not getting the red zone targets. He is not a tight end that's going to save you with catches and yardage in the middle of the field. And the shocking result of the week, the formerly Owens go into Cincinnati and beat the Bengals 39-38. A game, again, which Tyrod Taylor was going to be the starting quarterback, gets ruled out with injury. Justin Fields becomes a starter based off of an injury and has a good fantasy day. He doesn't even look that bad in the air either. He had 244 yards, a touchdown, 2-point conversion passing, as well as 31 rushing yards and a 2-point conversion rushing. 20 fantasy points for Justin Fields. As we said, fantasy does not mean good players all the time, and Justin Fields is not a good NFL quarterback, yet he can still have these games because of the rushing upside alone. Breece Hall. Unfortunately, I had to play against Breece Hall this week. He had a passing touchdown. You hear that right? Passing touchdown this week for 4 yards. He also had 133 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns, and then 2 catches for 14 yards. 32.8 fantasy points. We will talk about him later in the best and worst performers of the week. You also got a good Isaiah Davis game. 7 carries for 65 yards, 5 catches on 5 targets for 44 yards and a 2-point conversion. 17.9 fantasy points from the backup running back on the Jets. Nothing you could have predicted, no matter how bad you thought the Bengals defense are. The fact that 2 Jets running backs went for over 17 fantasy points is crazy to see. In terms of the Bengals QBs and running backs, I have Joe Flacco on my bench, which ended up being a good choice, just barely. Had a very solid day, 223 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown, 24 fantasy points. Chase Brown, a good bounce back game for Chase Brown, who I unfortunately also played this week. 73 yards on the ground, a touchdown, 3 catches on 3 targets, 32 yards, and a touchdown. And just as I said for the Jets, again, with a score 39-38, there was a lot of offense in this game. Samaje Perine, the backup running back on the Bengals, 9 carries for 94 yards, a touchdown. He also had 1 catch for 6 yards, 17 fantasy points. Both sets of running backs in this game going over 17 fantasy points. Not something you could have seen coming, and it did happen. In terms of receivers, you had Tyler Johnson for the New York Jets, 15.4 fantasy points, 3 catches, 64 yards, and a touchdown. Everyone else under 10 fantasy points. In terms of Bengals wide receivers, Jamar Chase had 12 catches on 19 targets for 91 yards, 21 fantasy points. If you are the Jamar Chase owner in your fantasy football league, the volume is always going to be there. Joe Flacco loves to hyper-target the number 1 target. And for the T. Higgins owners in fantasy leagues, which in the Holei League is me, 1 catch for 44 yards and a touchdown on 2 targets. He had a decent fantasy day, 11.4 fantasy points. I was in the car with my fiance looking at the game scores right about in the second quarter, and I mentioned that I was catfished by T. Higgins. Had him on the bench last week. He had his biggest week of the season, 22 fantasy points last week. And I said that I got catfished. He then had the 44-yard touchdown, which I thought was a sign of things to come for the game. He proceeded to not catch the ball again. Again, 11 fantasy points you're okay with. The context that you had a 44-yard touchdown, though, and still only finished with 11 fantasy points does not feel good. Mason Taylor, tight end for the New York Jets, 5 catches, 34 yards, and a touchdown, 14.4 fantasy points. You would be happy with that. Noah Fant with 7 points on 3 catches for 41 yards. Nothing too special. Next game, which was a game that was super interesting to see, the 49ers versus the Houston Texans. Texans were favored at home, which is not uncommon for a team to be favored at home. But the context of the, at the time, 5-2 49ers being road underdogs to the 2-4 Houston Texans was interesting to see. Vegas knew something we did not, though, however. Texans go on to win 26-15. Mac Jones, fine day, 19 fantasy points, 2 passing touchdowns with an interception. Christian McCaffrey, again, one of the duds of the week, which 9 points can feel like a dud, but when it's Christian McCaffrey, who has been averaging 30-plus touches a game, 8 carries for 25 yards, 3 catches, or 43 yards, 9.8 fantasy points. The Christian McCaffrey owners in your league would be extremely disappointed with that. Woody Marks for the Houston Texans, 11 carries, 62 yards, as well as 4 catches, 49 yards, 15 fantasy points on the day. Nick Chubb with 8 fantasy points. Both of those playable options. Obviously, you were pretty happy with the Woody Marks. You could have taken a stab on Texans wide receivers, as nobody in our league did, which I don't really blame you. Xavier Hutchinson ended up being the biggest beneficiary. 5 catches, 69 yards, and a touchdown. Jaden Higgins had 4 catches, 34 yards, and a touchdown. And then Jalen Noel, 5 for 63. Braxton Berrios in the year 2025 with 5 catches and 38 yards. 4 receivers on the Texans with 8.8 or more fantasy points. Meanwhile, you had 0 wide receivers on the 49ers with that same number. As the leading receiver, Juwan Jennings, 4 catches, 45 yards, only got you 8.5. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and then 50 rushing yards as well. Dylan Gabriel. I'm a bit more of a Shador apologist than the average person, but wow. Some of the throws he had this week were terrible, were horrible. He finishes with 13 fantasy points, had 2 interceptions, a lot of misplaced throws, though. I mean, if you really watch the game, he does not look very good. I'd be willing to give the stab on Shador. I don't think it could be any worse than what Dylan Gabriel's putting out for you. And you're 2-6. Quinshot Judkins, another one of those dud performances that you were expecting a lot from. Only 19 rushing yards, averaging less than 2 a carry, 3 catches for -2 yards. He finishes with 4 points. Ramondre Stevenson in a dominant 32-point, offensive showing. He only finishes with 5 fantasy points. Travion Henderson has an efficient day running. He loses a fumble. He finishes with 4 points. Tough day for the running backs in this matchup. Wide receivers in this matchup, none for the Cleveland Browns. Nobody more than 5 fantasy points, and no one that you were starting with more than 5 fantasy points. Jerry Jeudy, I don't care how bad Dylan Gabriel is. Jerry Jeudy might just be bad at football. 0 catches on 2 targets. I'm not looking to start him or borderline even roster him going forward. It has been bad for Jerry Jeudy this season. On the Patriots side, a lot of good fantasy outputs. You had Kayshon Boutte with 75 yards on 3 catches and a touchdown. Mac Hollins, Mr. Barefoot himself, 7 catches on 7 targets for 89 yards. And Stephon Diggs gets his first touchdown on the season. Only 14 receiving yards, but 3 catches. That saves him a 10-point fantasy day. In terms of tight ends, again, what is the Browns' offense? It is going to be the tight end play. Harold Fannin, who I played this week, who I had earlier in the season and traded to Chase. 6 catches, 62 yards and a touchdown, 18.4 fantasy points. David Njoku, 4 catches, 37 yards and a touchdown, 13.7 for him. You're very happy with both of those. Hunter Henry saves his day to be manageable with a 1-catch, 7-yard touchdown. In terms of the next game, which for me personally is the one that hurts the most, we have the Giants taking on the Eagles. And this game is personal for me because I watched my glorious running back 2, Cam Skattebo, suffer a gruesome leg injury, dislocated ankle, immediate surgery he had last night, carted off the field. Season is probably done. And then, that was a tough one for me, tough for the Giants in general, as they go on to lose this game 20-38. Jackson Dart, not the fantasy games you normally see from him, but still a very good one. 19 fantasy points, 193 in the air, a touchdown, and he also had 1 on the ground. Cam Skattebo did catch an 18-yard touchdown before getting injured. He had a 10-point fantasy day. Tyron Tracy became the starting running back following the Cam Skattebo injury. He finishes with 7 fantasy points. In terms of Eagles, Jalen Hurts, 4 touchdowns in the air without A.J. Brown. Very nice to see, 79 yards in the air. And you finally got your Saquon Barkley bounce back game. 14 carries, 150 yards, a touchdown, which was for 50 yards, and then 4 catches for 24 yards and a touchdown. 34.4 fantasy points. That is exactly what you want to see if you are the Saquon Barkley owner in your league. Tank Bigsby, 9 carries, 104 yards. Super efficient day for him. Good to see him getting more involved with this offense. Wan'Dale Robinson, the leading receiver for the Giants, still only 7 fantasy points. That includes over Theo Johnson, who only had 5. The Eagles, Devontae Smith without A.J. Brown, 6 catches, 84 yards, no touchdowns, 14 fantasy points. Jahan Dotson in the year 2025, the Commanders Scraps had a 40-yard touchdown catch. That is the most relevant he will be for this entire season. And then Dallas Goedert, 3 catches, 28 yards, but the 2 touchdowns gives him a 17.8 fantasy point outing. Next, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the New Orleans Saints. And from a fantasy perspective, this was the worst of the worst this week. You always have that issue when it comes to good team versus bad team, where you're like, good team should dominate bad team. That means their fantasy players will do well. Well, you also run into the issue there where they dominate them so much that their offensive players have to do absolutely nothing. And that is exactly what happened in this game. Buccaneers dominate 23-3 over the Saints. However, you have your worst Baker Mayfield output of the season. No touchdowns at all. He had a lost fumble. He finishes with 3 fantasy points in a 20-point win. Crazy to see. Sean Tucker ended up being the highest scoring fantasy running back of this group with Bucky Irving out. He had the touchdown. He finishes with 9. Rashad White finishes with 8. In terms of Saints, you had Spencer Rattler have a tough day. He gets benched for Tyler Shuck. Tyler Shuck comes in, also has a rough day. If the New Orleans Saints look at themselves and say Spencer Rattler is the issue, then I don't know what to tell them. Spencer Rattler has played fine football this season. That team has a lot of issues that run much deeper than the quarterback position. In terms of running backs, Alvin Kamara, 6-point day, and then Devin Neal, 4-point day. Pretty miserable stuff. No Buccaneers receiver more than 10 fantasy points. Egbuka, pretty disappointing. 3 catches on 9 targets for 35 yards. Saints, funny enough, had 2 receivers over 10 points. You had Chris Olave, 8 catches, 12 targets, 63 yards. And then you had Rashid Shaheed, 9 catches, 12 targets, 75 yards. In terms of tight ends, you got Cade Otton, 4 for 40. And then Jawan Johnson, 5 for 53. Very frustrating game. Hope nobody listening to this had to watch that game because it was just a sad one to see. And the game on the complete other side that excites a lot of people in terms of fantasy relevance, we had the Dallas Cowboys versus the Denver Broncos. Broncos went at home 44-24. Dak Prescott, disappointing day for sure. 2 interceptions, no touchdowns, only 8 fantasy points. Joe Milton came in later in that game and he had a passing touchdown himself. Bo Nix, very solid day, 24 fantasy points, 247 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. You were still happy with Javonte Williams. Luckily in this game, he had 2 rushing touchdowns, 41 yards, 17 fantasy points on the day. RJ Harvey, breakout game. Now, was it actually a breakout game in terms of him being more involved? Probably not, because J.K. Dobbins, despite all the injuries, has been incredibly efficient this season on the ground. 15 carries, 111 yards for J.K. Dobbins. He finishes with 14 fantasy points without a touchdown. R.J. Harvey with 24 fantasy points due to 3 touchdowns, 2 on the ground, 1 in the air. We'll see if that means anything more for him. I think he's in the unfortunate situation, kind of with Jaden Blue a little bit for the Cowboys, where the running back one is just so good, it's hard to justify taking away some of their snaps. And so we'll see what happens with RJ Harvey going forward. J.K. Dobbins still had a great game. In terms of receivers, you had 3 with over 10 points on the Cowboys. Jalen Tolbert had 47 and a touchdown. CeeDee Lamb had 7 for 74, and then George Pickens 7 for 78. Big Troy Franklin day for the Denver Broncos. 6 catches, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns. Pat Bryant got a touchdown as well on 40 yards. Cortland Sutton, solid enough day. Probably wouldn't be thrilled with it. 4 catches for 67 yards. Just 2 games remaining to go over from this Sunday slate. The Tennessee Titans get dominated by the Indianapolis Colts 38-14. Cam Ward, very solid day. 159 yards, touchdown and interception, 13 fantasy points. Daniel Jones, another dominant fantasy performance, 272 yards, 3 touchdowns, 23 fantasy points on the day. Jonathan Taylor, what a beautiful, beautiful man Jonathan Taylor is. The only reason my fantasy team has still got a fighting chance for the playoffs. I think this might be his 3rd straight game with 3 touchdowns or more. It is insane the run that he is on right now. The number 1 player in fantasy right now. 12 carries, 153 yards, which is the most insane thing on top of all of these very impressive touchdown performances he's putting out. He is still so efficient on the ground. 12 for 153, 2 touchdowns, one of those being a 50-yard touchdown, as well as a receiving touchdown. 38.4 fantasy points, as you'll hear later in the studs of the week, best players of the week, 38.4 fantasy points. In terms of Titans running backs, Tony Pollard, disappointing day, only 6 fantasy points. Tajay Spears gets the touchdown. He finishes with a very nice 17 fantasy points. Chimere Dike for the Titans, another week of very good production. 7 catches for 93 yards. Chimere Dike is rostered in our league. He might not be in some others. I would definitely take a look because he's put together 2 very nice fantasy performances in a row. And that's pretty much it for the Titans. Michael Pittman Jr., crazy touchdown catch. If you haven't seen it, please go look and find that highlight. No idea how he comes down with the football. 8 catches, 95 yards and a touchdown, 23 fantasy points, and that touchdown catch was insane. Josh Downs finds his way into the end zone as well. 3 catches, 39 yards, 12 fantasy points. Tyler Warren, fine fantasy day, 4 for 53, a little disappointing. 2 Titans tight ends who are relevant. Chig Okonkwo, 4 for 53, just like Tyler Warren. And then Gunnar Helm had 2 for 23, but a touchdown. And the final game to go over for this Sunday slate, the Aaron Rodgers Bowl. The Green Bay Packers take down the Pittsburgh Steelers 35-25 on Sunday Night Football. Jordan Love outduels Aaron Rodgers. Jordan Love, who I have in Holei League, started this week, 28.3 fantasy points, 360 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns, as well as a 2-point conversion. Super nice to see. Aaron Rodgers had 219 in the air, 2 touchdowns. Fine day for him, 16 fantasy points. Josh Jacobs got into the end zone, saved the fantasy day for him. That wasn't very impressive. He had 13 fantasy points. Emmanuel Wilson had 10 fantasy points as well. Jaylen Warren, pretty efficient runner. Looks good when he plays. Only 9 fantasy points. Didn't find his way into the end zone. Receivers, Christian Watson. I know that is going to unlock this Packers offense going forward. Christian Watson, 4 catches, 85 yards. That is the guy. That is their number 1 receiver, if you don't believe it. That's what I see. And I think that this Packers offense, in terms of passing offense, is going to look much better going forward with Christian Watson out there. Romeo Doubs had 9 fantasy points, and then everything going down for the Packers from there. Roman Wilson had 4 catches for 74 yards and touchdown. Prize performance of the game for the Steelers. DK Metcalf, 5 for 55 and a touchdown, 16 fantasy points. You were pleased with that. And the performance of the day, Tucker Kraft, 7 catches, 143 yards, 2 touchdowns. Reminds me a lot of the unfortunate Thursday night football game versus the Commanders that I had to watch and bleed my eyes out to. Huge game for Tucker Kraft. Actually swung one of the results in the Holei League toward the Tucker Kraft owner, which we will talk about later. And just before we get into our Monday Night Football preview, we're going to go over the top 5 performers from every position group in fantasy. Current quarterback 1 on the week is Jordan Love, who I have rostered. 28 fantasy points. Drake May in 2nd, Justin Herbert in 3rd, Jalen Hurts in 4th, and Bo Nix in 5th. At running back, Jonathan Taylor, who I also have. Quarterback 1, running back 1. Still a loss on the week. 38 fantasy points. James Cook with 35, Saquon with 34, Breece Hall with 33, and Chase Brown with 26. Troy Franklin. Count it. Troy Franklin, number 1 wide receiver on the week with 27. Michael Pittman, 2nd at 24. Khalil Shakir at 22. Jamar Chase at 21. And Jalen Waddle at 21. Rounds out the tier. Tucker Kraft, 33 and 2 on the week, which is Aronde Gadsden at 19 fantasy points. Harold Fannin in 3rd at 18. Dallas Goedert 4th at 18. And Kyle Pitts, 5th at 15. That rounds out the review, summary, and fantasy outlook of Week 8 Sunday games. We're now going to transition into the Monday Night Football review and then take a look at the Holei League matchups to end the episode. And here we are, Monday Night Football preview. Did one on Friday, but we're going to do another one a little bit closer now that we have a bit more of the pieces put together for this game. Commanders traveling to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs. Chiefs are favored pretty heavily in this game. I believe the line is 13.5. It is a very, very strong home favorite. And as a Commanders fan, I actually think that line probably gets covered because this offense has struggled with all the injuries. Though Debo and Terry McLaurin are back, Jaden Daniels is not. So this game could get ugly. In terms of fantasy relevant players in this game, you're starting Mahomes. Again, must start Mahomes. Must start players, Rashee Rice. And that's truly it in terms of must starts. Depending on your lineup situation, obviously, you've already made your decision when it comes to Monday Night Football if you're starting these players or not with Debo Samuel and Terry McLaurin and Xavier Worthy, because you have no other alternative if you wait for a Monday Night Football game. So if they are in your lineup, I'm sure they'll be fine plays. Marcus Mariota is a very, very reasonable streaming option. Again, when it comes to Monday Night Football, in terms of advice I can give on this podcast, you've already made that decision, right? Because you can't revert and play people who've already played on Sunday. So whatever decision you did make for this game, I hope it pans out well. Terry McLaurin, Debo Samuel can have good games. I'm sure it's possible. Hopefully Marcus Mariota has a better game than he's had in the past. Not as good as he had last year when he came in relief. Mahomes, we'll see how the game plays out for him. Again, if the script goes how Vegas expects it to with a dominant Chiefs win, you might run into the Baker Mayfield issue where he has a pretty poor game and doesn't do much because the Chiefs don't need to do much. Chiefs running backs, I talked about it on Friday. I don't love any of them. Rashad Smith is the one I'm leaning toward in terms of rest of season outlook. Isaiah Pacheco, though, is probably your best play in terms of he's been there. They want to play him the most right now because he's familiar. Kareem Hunt is getting phased out more and more each week. So somebody I'm not really looking forward to. Tight ends, based on draft capital you probably put into him, you're starting Travis Kelce. I'm sure he'll have a fine game. He obviously is not having the juice like he did before, but he's been a good tight end play. Zach Ertz, I said this on Friday as well. If this was Jaden Daniels playing, you're starting him. Jaden Daniels likes to throw to Zach Ertz a lot, especially in the red zone. Marcus Mariota, not so much, and a couple of the bad weeks of Zach Ertz's season so far have been in the Marcus Mariota starting weeks. So something to keep an eye on. We'll review this game tomorrow on Tuesday's podcast when maybe the Commanders squeak out a win. Highly doubt it, but that's what I'm hoping for. And just to mention on the podcast, it's been really great to hear the response for the podcast and how people have enjoyed listening, and I'm hoping that over more and more episodes, I'm going to be able to do a better and better job. But it's been funny to see a lot of people talking about trades this week and hoping to get into the trade review segment, which I thought was really funny. I had Eric offer me a trade last night and with a text to me saying, let's make history, which is always funny to see. And I opened the trade to see Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker, and 50 fab budget for Jonathan Taylor. Now, I'm not even going to give an assessment on is this a good or bad trade. All I will say is you have to give up your firstborn child for me to even consider giving up Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor has like saved everything for me this season, and I would need like your entire roster from anyone who ever wanted to trade for Jonathan Taylor to consider trading him. But I thought that was hilarious. I love people wanting to get into the segment, and I think that's just great for the league in general. And so to wrap up the episode, we're just going to do a quick overview of the current head-to-head matchups in Week 8 of the Holei League. As I've alluded to, unfortunately, multiple times in this podcast, Chase, who is sitting at 1-6, 100% going to beat me this week. 157 right now, projected 170 now, actually. I said 165 earlier. I'm projected 141. Very good week for me. Still not enough. Nathan projected currently to beat Martin on the week, though that could swing. Projected to beat Eric on the week. That one could swing. That one seems a bit more likely not to swing. In terms of Roy and Will's matchup is finished. Will wins 140-91. That's his second one of the season, which is big for him. Holden and Ben are still in a tough matchup. Currently 8 points between the two. That could swing based on Monday Night Football. And really the craziest result of the week is Nate, who is sitting at 7-0 versus Lucas at 0-7, which I joked about as an impossible matchup on Friday. It took a legacy Tucker Kraft performance for that game to really sway into Nate's favor. So Lucas at 120, still projected to win with Nate only having Patrick Mahomes left. He only needs 5 points. Unless he has a Baker Mayfield type performance, I see that game being pretty much locked down for Nate. And finally, Dustin, with 155 points on the week, projected a dominating win over CJ. We will go over tomorrow what that means for win-loss record and standings, as well as waiver wire ads for tomorrow, and then, of course, a Monday review. And that's it. That's it for the episode today. Thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, please feel free to follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as well to maybe leave a review, a 5-star review, anything that can help push out the podcast to the algorithms of those pages. For tomorrow's episode, as I alluded to before, waiver wire, Monday night review, as well as the weekly matchup review for Holei League. After that, we will then have an episode on Friday, and we will also do a Thursday night football preview. It'll be coming 2 days before, so in terms of injury news and stuff like that, it could change between Tuesday to Wednesday and then Thursday, but I'll try to give a quick Thursday night preview as well tomorrow. Thank you for listening to the Holei Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Holei Fantasy Football Podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for the latest episodes.